Hey everybody, welcome back to Barter Hordes. My name is Robert, and today I'm going to do another tag video. I'm going to do the Reader Problems book tag. But before I get into the questions, I just want to do a quick catch up. It's been about a week since my last video. I just finished reading Thomas Hardy's Far from the Madding Crowd last night, and I'm going to finish March with Jane Austen's Northanger Abbey, a book I actually haven't read before. I've read some of her other novels, but I've never read that one. And so after some 9 new releases in a row, it's time for me to go back and read a few classics. And I'll do a video after I finish the Jane Austen on those 2 books. And so that'll probably be my next video in a couple of days. I've been distracted, as I mentioned in one of my last videos, a little bit in March with March Madness, but that's winding down now, and both of my teams are out, alas. Kentucky lost in the Sweet 16, and Texas Tech made it all the way to the Elite 8 before losing. And so there's only 3 games left this weekend, and I may even miss the Saturday games because I have some plans with some friends. So I've been a little bit distracted from reading, but I still managed to keep up with my goal for the month of March, so I'm not too disheartened by that. I am enjoying getting back into some classics, though. That's been kind of fun. Other than that, not a great deal is going on. As you can see behind me, it's another gorgeous day in South Florida. This morning when I woke up, it looked like it was about to pour. It was overcast and not very pretty. I thought, well, I'm not going to be filming today, but an hour later it had burned off and it looks gorgeous. So I'm going to take advantage of the sunshine while I can and get a video done. So I wasn't tagged to this video. I've just seen it around, and the questions just interested me a little bit. Some of the questions seem to be oriented more towards YA than towards adult fiction, but I can make them work as well as I can. So the first question is, you have 20,000 books on your TBR. How in the world do you decide what to read next? I never have that big a TBR. I have kind of tried to keep my TBR to manageable totals. And for me, the TBR list is only the books I actually already own. There are 20,000 books I would like to read someday, but I don't own them. Right now, I think I have under 40 on my TBR, and that's higher than usual. I just recently bought some books I plan to read in the coming month. And so I'm a little bit of a mood reader. I have tried using a rigid TBR in the past, and it's worked okay for me. But then I find something that I really want to read, and my plans kind of get thrown out. So I'm a little bit of a mood reader. Like I said, I just went through 9 new releases in a row because I had them on my desk. And now I'm working through some classics, some that I haven't read in a couple of decades and some that I've never read. And so I'm filling in some gaps there. And then after a few classics, I'll probably go and pick up some backlists, some 20th century books that I'm still very fond of, and then throw in a little nonfiction. So I'm pretty much a mood reader. I look at what I have on my desk and just pick whatever strikes my fancy. Number 2 is, you're halfway through a book and you're just not loving it. Do you quit or are you committed? This is one I struggle with. I, for years and years and years, could never DNF a book. I figured I started it, I'm going to read it, and I'm going to finish it. And for the most part, I'm still like that to a large extent. I tend not to give up on books. Now, that doesn't mean I don't hate read the second half of books. I often do that. But I tend to finish it once I've started. I don't know, maybe there's this vain hope that it's suddenly going to get better or that I'm suddenly going to click with it. Doesn't usually happen. If I hate it halfway through, I'm going to hate the whole thing. But I tend to finish most of the books I read. I don't DNF things. It's like movies. I almost never walk out of movies that I'm not liking. I think I've walked out of one movie my entire life, and half of you will boo me for it, but it was Alien. I just found it thoroughly disturbing and disgusting, and when the creature pops out of the guy's stomach or girl's stomach, I don't remember who it was, I was done. So I actually left my date at the theater and met her there after the movie was over. That was probably our last date too. Number 3, the end of the year is coming and you're so close but so far away on your Goodreads reading challenge. Do you try to catch up, and how? The few years I've done the Goodreads challenge, I've either been miles away from finishing it because life, or I've been ahead of the game and had a comfortable margin towards the end. So I've never really had to try to race to the finish. I know a lot of people do to get that number. They'll pick up a bunch of graphic novels or shorter books where they can pad their numbers a little bit. To me, I mean, who's that fooling? It doesn't fool me that I've done that. So I tend not to do that. But I usually make my goal. So I try to set my goal as something reasonable that I can surpass relatively comfortably. This year, I kind of stuck my neck out. And since I'm not teaching now, I decided I would try to read 100 books this year. I've never read probably more than 80 before in a year. And so far, I'm on schedule. I'll have 25 books finished by the end of March. So I'm right on schedule without having to push too hard. But if I get to December and I'm 5 or 6 books short, I'm not suddenly going to change the types of books that I read just to reach that arbitrary goal. It's not that big a deal. If I was that concerned with the number, I would just revise the goal, but I'm not. So, okay, number 4. The covers of a series you love do not match. How do you cope? This one isn't really all that appropriate to me because I tend not to read series. I read standalone fiction almost exclusively. I have read some series, and in that case, I probably would want all the covers to match. When I was reading some young adult series, back when I was teaching young adults, I remember reading the Hunger Games series, and I read them in very quick succession over one of the holiday breaks. And it bothered me a little bit because the first 2 were in paperback and the third one was only out in hardback. And I wanted to read it enough, I just bought the hardback. If it was something I was going to keep on my shelves permanently, I'd probably be persnickety enough where I would find the matching cover when it was available and give away the other one so that my set matched. But that rarely is a concern for me because I just don't read series. The one series that I intend to read someday, I don't know when, is Lord of the Rings. I've never read it. I've read The Hobbit. In fact, it took me 4 tries over 30 years to read The Hobbit, and then last summer maybe, or last year sometime, I picked it up and absolutely loved it and raced through it. And so I just apparently wasn't ready to read it at other ages. And I'm sure that's the way I'll feel about Lord of the Rings too. And I'll want those 3, I'm sure, to look the same. But there's so many editions that are available, I'm sure that's not going to be an issue for me. Number 5, everyone and their mother loves a book you really don't like. Who do you bond with over shared feelings? This is a bit of a problem because I don't have book readers in my real day-to-day life. I had some, of course, in my teaching colleagues, but now that I'm no longer there, I don't run into them very often. But I live alone. My son isn't quite a reader anymore. I'm hoping he'll come back to it someday, so we don't talk about books. My other friends in the nearby area are mostly friends I met when I was coaching in speech and debate, so they're very busy with that and probably don't read as much. So I don't really have anybody to talk to. One of the reasons I started this channel. But I have had situations where in the last year I have read 3 very popular books that I really disliked and a lot of other people have really loved. And I want to talk about them, but at the same time, I don't want to step on anybody's toes. But when I read A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara, I was just outraged by the writing. I loved the story, I loved the characters, but she needed an editor. Apparently she had one that she just chose to ignore. But when you let 4 or 5 split infinitives show up on every single page of a mammoth book, I want to burn it. I just can't do it. You need to be a better editor than that. And she worked as an editor, so she has no excuse. And that was really hard because there was nobody to talk about that because everybody was just praising how wonderful this book was. The same thing to some degree happened with Paul Auster's 4-3-2-1, although that one got a more decided mixed review. I liked the beginning of it, and then it got tedious and got self-indulgent, and he just started writing about his friends and his heyday at Columbia, and I just couldn't be bothered. but yet it's shortlisted for the Booker Prize. Go figure. And then more recently, after I started my BookTube channel, I had a negative reaction to Elif Batuman's The Idiot. And one of my BookTube friends, Claire, loves the book, and so we actually had a really promising exchange about why we liked and disliked the book, and it's actually leading to, Claire and I are going to do a buddy read of Thomas Hardy's Jude the Obscure sometime in April, and so it's given us the opportunity to see if we disagree on other books as well, or agree. And I really love her channel, so I'm looking forward to that. So yeah, BookTube has given me the community to talk to about books that I don't really like. And I try to do it in a respectful way, but I'm not gonna just pretend to love something because it's a popular book when it really bothers me in some ways. Now, I have also liked some very popular books that other people have disliked intensely, and I've enjoyed watching their reviews. Sometimes the negative reviews are almost better to watch than the positive ones, because the positive ones all seem to be pretty much the same. The negative ones go at it at their own unique fashion, so that's been kind of fun. But BookTube is my community when I disagree with a popular book. Number 6, you're reading a book and you are about to start crying in public. How do you deal? This doesn't happen to me, not because I don't cry, but I typically don't read in public because I can't deal with the distractions and the noise. I can't concentrate very well unless I have either just music in the background, and it has to be a certain type of music, or no noise at all. So I don't read in public. However, as I mentioned on one of Leah's videos, or maybe it was even a comment on one of mine that Leah commented on, but books occasionally do bring me to tears. Now, if that were to happen in public, I would probably just, I've got an allergy, go to the restroom, wipe my eyes, and then close my book and go home. I don't know. It's never happened to me, so I don't know how to deal with that kind of situation. Now, movies, they wreck me. And if I go with people, I have to be very careful about the kind of movie I go see, otherwise I come out of there just blubbering. Number 7, a sequel of a book you loved just came out, but you've forgotten a lot from the prior novel. Will you reread the book, skip the sequel, try to find a synopsis on Goodreads, or cry in frustration? Again, I don't read a lot of series, so that doesn't happen to me much. But if a book draws on another book pretty in a deep way, I will either try to reread the book, as I'm doing with the Shakespeare plays that are being redone in the Hogarth Shakespeare series, or I'll at least read a healthy synopsis, and usually that's enough to jog my memory of the details where I can enjoy the second book. I don't always feel compelled to go back and reread the entire first book, but again, series are not something I read very often, so that's not really a problem that I've had to deal with. Number 8, you do not want anyone borrowing your books. How do you politely tell people nope when they ask? This is a minor problem for me because people generally don't ask me to borrow books. Like I said, there aren't a lot of big book readers in my close circle of friends here. I am a little bit hesitant to lend books because I'm very protective of books, and nothing irritates me more than a book not coming home. And it's happened to me. And it always colors the way I think about that person. It shouldn't. It's just a book. I can go buy another copy of it if I really want it. And in some cases, I've done that rather than bring up the issue with the friend who never returned the book. But it just doesn't happen much. I think what I would have to do is I would have to just accept the fact that if I lend out books, they might not come home, and that's okay because they're being read by somebody else who hopefully will love it too, and I can always just buy a replacement if I really need it. But it doesn't happen much to me. There are very few people asking me to borrow my books. Number 9, reading ADD. You've picked up and put down 5 books in the last month. How do you get over your reading slump? I generally don't pick up books and put them down, although I know that's something that a lot of readers do when they're not striking hot with a book. What I'll do though is if I start to feel a reading slump come on, it's usually when I've read too much of the same kind of work in a row. And so I'll change genres. Or I'll go to one of my lighthearted reads. I love Carl Hiaasen. He's a South Florida writer. He writes for the Miami Herald. But his fiction is something that always makes me laugh. The same thing with Christopher Moore. I don't like horror films or horror books. But Christopher Moore takes these horror conventions and makes them absurd and hysterical. And so I've loved all of his books. And so I'll go read something like that as a palate cleanser and then go find out what my next read's going to be. So for me, it's usually shifting genres. Or I've often found that if I will pick up a nonfiction book, that will get me back in the mood to read again, and I'll be able to go back to fiction after that. I tend to get stuck in a rut with fiction, and so nonfiction is a good way to combat that rut. Number 10, there are so many new books coming out that you're dying to read. How many do you actually buy? I don't really have a set pattern. There's no independent bookstore here in Fort Lauderdale, which I am shocked and disheartened by. We have 2 or 3 Barnes and Nobles in the county. We have some used bookstores. I'm one of the few people who's a book lover who's not a fan of used bookstores for a couple reasons. One, the smell always bothers me. There's something about that musty smell of old paperback books that just doesn't sit well with me. But mostly it's a conscious decision that if I'm going to read a book, I'm going to buy a new copy of that, because I believe the author should get paid for his or her work. I worked as an author for a while and lived off book royalties, and was very conscious of that when I was writing. And so I'm not against used bookstores, but I don't tend to support them unless it's for a book that's totally out of print, because I prefer to give those couple of bucks to the author who wrote a book. I don't remember which ancient philosopher said, if a book is worth reading, it's worth buying. But I've always kind of felt that way. I like to keep books, and so I tend to buy all my books rather than check them out from the library. I do support public libraries. I love them. In fact, I use them for audiobooks. But I'm also impatient. So when I want to read a certain book, I'm not going to get in a queue of 45 people waiting for the same copy of a book at the public library. I'll just go buy it. So that's the way I deal with that. I don't actually buy a bunch of them at a time. I don't go on book buying binges. I usually buy a title that I'm interested in one at a time. And like I said, I'd like to get my TBR eventually down to 0. And when I finish a book, I get to treat myself to go to the bookstore and buy a new one, or buy a new one online. I do shop at Amazon. I have mixed feelings about that, but since we don't have an independent bookstore here, the closest good independent bookstore is in Miami, which is an hour away with traffic. I tend to buy books either through Book Depository or through Amazon, and occasionally at the local Barnes and Noble. Okay, and the last question, number 11. After you've bought the new books you can't wait to get to, how long do they sit on your shelf before you get to them? It depends. If it's a reference type book for writing or for literature, especially when I was teaching, they could sit on my shelf for years because I'm going to dip into them from time to time instead of read them cover to cover. Most of the books that I buy, I try to read within a couple of months. I have a few on my TBR now that have been on that list for close to a year, and I'm working through that backlist right now. Like I said, my TBR is approaching 40, and I'm trying to get that down to single digits eventually. I don't seem to be making much progress, but I'm trying. So I'm not one to buy stacks and stacks and stacks of books and then not ever get to them. I like to have read all the books that I have. And there are always new ones that I want. One of the great regrets of getting older is that I know that I have a finite number of books left in me, and I'm never going to get to all the ones that I want to read. That's just a fact of life. It's one of the things that has kept me from being a bigger rereader of books, is because I know there's so many other books out there I haven't experienced yet that I hate to give one of those remaining precious slots to a book I already somewhat know. But I'm getting over that a little bit and doing a little bit more rereading. All right, I've rambled on far too long already. Look for another video from me in a couple of days about Far from the Madding Crowd and Northanger Abbey, and then I will see you again in another video soon. Thanks. Bye.